This graph shows the percentage of UFC fights in a given year that ended in submission. The first thing you'll probably notice is that the submission rate goes down pretty sharply between 1994 and 2002. Why is that? One way we can explain this decline is the Gracie effect. This is Royce Gracie. Between 1993 and 1994, Royce won 11 UFC fights back to back, submitting 10 opponents and TKOing another. Gracie had a competitive advantage over his opponents. It was something called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. In tournaments designed to determine the most effective martial art, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was king, and as a result, people started learning it. But if people start learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, why would the submission rate go down? The answer: knowledge diffusion. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was no longer reserved for an elite few. As more people sought it out, the playing field was leveled. It became the original base for MMA. And as the skill gap narrowed, the submission rate fell. This is accentuated by the fact that BJJ defense improves faster than offense. This graph represents your BJJ journey. Let's look at your first year of training. The average number of submissions you can pull off in a given session goes from 1 to 2. The number of times you're being submitted, however, drops from 10 to 4. Your defense improves quicker than your offense, and as a result, submissions overall become rarer. Anecdotally speaking, I think most grapplers would attest to this, but do we see any evidence of this in the UFC data? Here I've put submissions into two categories: standard submissions like arm bars and triangles, and weird submissions, things like neck cranks and forearm chokes. One was even described as chin to eye. What we see is that in the 90s and early 2000s, weird submissions made up a higher proportion of finishes, and I think we can attribute this to a lack of awareness on the ground. Take a look at some examples. It would be extremely rare to see a modern day UFC fighter submit to one of these. So what submissions are happening today? Well, I analysed the data and found 3 interesting trends. The first is the growth in front headlock and arm triangle submissions over time. This chart shows the number of front headlock and arm triangle submissions hit since 1994. Before 2007, these techniques were pretty rare. Today, both are significant players. The second is the lack of growth in leg locks. This chart shows the proportion of submissions categorized as leg locks in a given year. I was surprised to see no real growth in the last 5 years. We've seen leg locks become perhaps the most dominant submission in high-level no-gi grappling in the last 5 years, but this hasn't translated to MMA. The most obvious reason for this is the difference in consequences. To attempt a leg lock often means sacrificing a dominant position and/or leaving yourself open to strikes. Here's esteemed leg locker Gary Tonin attacking legs in an MMA fight, and here's him being knocked out seconds later. Of course, leg locks still have their place in MMA, not just for submissions but for creating scrambles and reversing position. However, the final takeaway from this analysis is what you might consider the Pareto principle. In the last 10 years, just 4 techniques accounted for over 80% of all submissions. So if you're an MMA fighter, or you want your jiu-jitsu to be applicable to an actual cage fight, get good at these 4 submissions. Thanks for watching. I've got loads more UFC data analytics content to come. So if you liked it and you want to see more, hit subscribe.